Okay, so the clone machine. So it tells you have to write a function that. Not that one.
Yeah, I got it. Sorry, but it's something else.
Do you guys want me to do this question? The clone? Yes? All right, I'll do it. So I'm pretty sure you have to write a function that's called. Can you guys all see this? You want me to? I'm gonna turn the lights on. This is better, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have to write a function called clone machine. And this function is going to take a parent, right? And that parent is going to be an object. So I'm pretty sure this question wants you to return a clone of the parent, but the name property has to have the parent's name plus clone. And you have to alter the parent by pushing in the clone's name to the offspring. So the parent is going to look like this. It's going to have a name property, and it's going to be a string. So I'll just call it my name. The species will also be a string. And then I'll have offspring. And that's just going to be an array. And that's just going to be an array, right? So this type of object right here is what's going to be passed into clone machine. So, and then the results should look like the results, the thing that I'm returning, should look like this, right? But also, I want to push this name into this array, into the parent's offspring. So how do we do this? So the first thing we could do inside this function is define a variable called clone. And we could set that equal to an object. Now that object is going to have the same property name. But how do we get the name of the parents plus clone? Since we're passing the parent in as a parameter, we can access that object just by saying parent.name, right? And that's the name of the parent right there. You can even do, if you wanted to, you could do that, right? But .name is cleaner, so I'll do that. And then, since that equals a string, you could just do plus clone. So that gives you the name of the clone. Does everyone get this? Everyone gets this, yeah? Cool. So then, we need the species. The species is going to be the same exact thing. Parent.species, that's it, you're done. You have the parent being passed into this function. That has a species. The clone species should be the same thing as a parent. You don't need to alter it. You just have to set the clone's key of species to the parent species. And then offspring of the clone should just be an empty array. So now we have our clone. This is done. The clone is done. That's what we will be returning. But the problem wants you to alter the parent. We do this by just saying parent.offspring. So now I'm inside of the parent's offspring. I'm inside of this right now. And then you just .push clone.name. Return clone. And it's that simple. Since we're passing an object into this function, we can access the object's offspring, and .push mutates the original array. So when we when we console log parent at the end of this, after we run this, so if we run this, clone machine of parent, well, I guess I'll console log this too. So you could see that the first thing I'm console logging is the results of clone machine, and that is returning the clone. So you can see the name, Marco clone, species human, offspring empty array. But then I'm console logging the parent, and you see that the clone's name is inside the offspring array. Who's got questions on how this is working? Nobody. Sure. So this function is taking in an object, and I'm calling that parameter parent. So now any object that's coming into this function, I can reference in this function as parent. We're first setting up our clone object that we're going to return. So you just do this by saying curly brackets, and then you press enter, and then you can put as many keys in as you want. So the first key has to be a name. And we know that the question wants it to be the parent's name plus clone. So, since this parameter is referencing the object that you're passing in, and you know the object being passed in is always going to have a name property, you can just do parent.name, and that gives you that string. This is equal to whatever the parent's name is as a string. Then you just do plus clone, and it's good. That gives you the name plus clone. That's good. Then the species is the same thing, but the species you don't have to alter anything. It's just exactly the same. So the species key of the clone will be equal to parent.species. And then offspring is just an empty array because the new clone doesn't have any offspring. So it's just an empty array. But then you have to push this clone's name into the offspring of the parent object. So we still have access to that object right here. It's being passed through this function. So if we just say parent.offspring, we now have access to that array, and we can just dot push the clone name, which is defined here. After this is done, everything after line 20, you can access any property inside the clone and do whatever you want with it. So we just access clone.name and push it into the offspring of the parent. Then you return the new clone, and then if you want to go back into the parent, you'll see that that name is inside the parent, like I showed you in the terminal.
So because I'm looking at the 19.17 name, parent name, so because that's in the function parent.name, how does that connect to the explain how it connects to the actual?
Like you can think this parent, you could think of this object right here. That's parent,
Right.
because you're throwing it through there. So if this is now parent, this has a dot name, right? Do you understand?
Yeah.
So now you can access parent.name, parent.species, and you could even access, I could set this equal to parent.offspring too, but I'm not going to, because after this function is done running, parent.offspring is going to have another property. So you don't ever want a clone to have, you want always a clone to start with an empty array. Cool? Should I do another problem from yesterday?
Can you scroll down just a bit more quick? Because I think I just wrote what you wrote, but I'm only getting 3 steps past.
No. What else has to be done?
I'm not sure if the step below console.log, maybe I'm excluding that.
No, there's not.
I might have missed something.
This passes all the specs. I just copied and pasted into the workshop.
Alright, then
It's definitely you, man. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah. So everyone's good on this, right? So do you want me to do another one, or do you want me to start talking about functions? Sure, we can do MySplice. MySplice is a little tricky, honestly, but like it's not that bad. Good? Splice time? So now we have to write a function called MySplice. And this function is going to take 4 parameters, one of them being optional. So first, it's going to take an array, right? The second one is going to be the start index. The third one is going to be the delete count. And the fourth one will be new value. So if you guys were here, you guys learned about using the splice method for arrays, right? So you remember that you dot off an array, so this isn't actually in the splice method. But the splice method takes a point where you're starting, an index where you're starting, how many things you want to delete at that index and on, and you could also, if you wanted to, pass in a new value that you want to put at the start index. So splice is a little tricky, and it mutates the array. So there's 2 parts to solving this problem. You have to actually write out the functionality of doing the splice, but then you also have to mutate this array that you're passing in. So let's get started. The first thing you can do is create 2 variables. Start elements and end elements. And you'll set them both equal to an empty array.
So what's the logic?
Well, so you know that the array that's being passed through it, right? You have the start index. So anything before the start index is just going to be the same. So the start elements, what we're going to do is we're going to write just a for loop, and then it's going to be let I equals 0, I is less than start index, I plus plus. So you run this for loop up until the start index. Up until it's the start index, and then every time, every element that's before where you want to splice from, you just do start elements dot push array at I. So after this runs, you'll have start elements will be an array of all the values in the input array before the thing you're going to splice. So if you want to run this like a, let's say like let array equals this 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And you want to like my splice the array 1, 2, 1, right? And then you're not passing anything in. So that means that you want this array, you want to start at at index 2, which is 0, 1, 2. So you want to start at 3. And you want to take out one element. So you want to just take this element out. That means everything before it is still going to remain. It's still going to be the same.
Okay,
So you want to loop through up until the start index, what I'm doing down here, and just keep everything before it.
So start index is just the first number in this splice function.
Yes, start index is, yes.
Okay, got it.
So even if start index is 0, if start index is 0 and you want to start at the beginning, start elements will just be empty because the for loop is not going to run. Because it's going to say, if start index is 0, do the for loop only if I is less than start index. And if you're setting I to 0, 0 is not less than 0, so that for loop won't run.
Okay.
So now that we have that, we can check and see if there's a new value. Because if you're passing in a new value, no matter what you're deleting, at the start index, you're going to be throwing it in there. And we already have the array start elements of what should be kept. So if you have what should be kept, you know the thing right after should be the new value. But we only want to throw the new value into the start elements array if new value exists. So we have to do a conditional statement, an if statement. So we could say if new value is not equal to undefined, start elements dot push new value. The reason why I'm doing this if statement, new value is not equal to undefined, is because if you define a parameter in a function and then you don't pass that thing into it when you're calling the function, that parameter is always going to be undefined. So like you can say if new value. That just means if it's truthy or not. But what if the thing that you want to actually put into the array is false, or 0, or empty string, or null? Those are real values. So then this just wouldn't put those things in. So we make this very specific if it's undefined.
So none as a value should be allowed to be added.
Well, null, like, the thing is, whatever is the fourth, is this argument, should be put into the array. Whatever you as a person are passing. Unless
You
it's,
said like 0 or empty string or null.
yeah, those
should
are
be
all,
allowed.
yeah, why not?
They have to
If
be
they're
values.
like actually putting in, I want null to be in this array, then fine.
Okay, got it.
But like undefined, if you don't pass anything in, new value, the parameter, is going to be undefined.
Okay.
It's always going to be undefined. It won't be null. It's always going to be undefined. Because you're not defining new value when you're calling it with nothing, you know?
Yes, exactly.
So now that we push this in, start elements should have the beginning of the array plus whatever you want to add.
So, the only thing on top of what you said about null. So when you go to line 40, if new value equals null, then we wouldn't go into that loop because we would go into the else condition. But,
Say that again?
okay, let's say new value. Let's say you passed in null.
Yeah.
Right to new value.
This condition would run.
It would run, but it wouldn't go into it. It would go onto the else condition because null is not considered undefined, right?
No, it would go into the if condition.
Oh, so null is undefined.
No, null is not undefined. If value,
right. Oh, sorry,
if, you,
yeah, you're right.
if new
Yeah,
value
yeah,
is
yeah.
not equal to undefined,
Right.
so
right.
only undefined would
Right.
skip over this if.
Yeah.
Only undefined. Everything else would be pushed into the start elements array.
So speaking of null, is that like a is it just like a variable name in JavaScript, or is it actually a null? You know what I'm trying to say?
Null is like a data type.
Okay.
Null is very, very specific.
All right.
I'm pretty sure, like, if you... I'm pretty sure, like...
Console log type of null.
Yeah, if you console log type of null, you're going to get something really weird. It's an object, see? It's really weird. Like,
Alright.
null is super weird. Don't... This is like a bug. No, use null. Like, it's very useful. Definitely use null if you need to. But I'm pretty sure the person who, like, made JavaScript did something wrong, so now null is considered an object, but it's not an object.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, it's really weird.
But basically, for our function, we want to allow if null is passed as.
Yeah, if you're passing in null. Yeah, basically.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Null is a reserved variable. Yeah, like you can't like make a variable called null.
When is it like ever used?
Null?
Yeah.
Well, null is like
Used it for that grid.
yeah, undefined and null are two different things. Undefined is like this thing is not defined. This is a problem. Null is like empty value.
Empty value. Okay,
Pretty
that's
much.
why.
Yeah.
Fine.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I can't give you like an example of a use case right now, but like you'll
No,
you'll
that-
come
that
up with these.
clarifies
Yeah.
it. Empty value versus
Just not defining a variable. Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's the use case.
now we can figure out how many elements we want to delete, right? So we have the delete count and we have the start index. So if we do for let I is equal to start index, and then we do I is less than start index plus delete count, right? Then we can push these. Sorry, I forgot. We can push these into this. Huh? Yeah, deleted elements, my bad. So now we can push these into the deleted elements array. So we can do deleted elements dot push array at I.
So you better use splice because we want to alter.
You
Oh,
can't
no, we
use
don't.
splice in the you're making splice. Defeats the purpose to
Oh,
use
yeah.
splice.
Sorry, yeah.
Like my splice, return this dot splice. Like, like, wrong. And now
You have a typo.
where?
Elements, so then elements and after
Element. Oh yeah, my bad. And now, well, I guess we don't even need this step. But anyway, so for let's I, now we want to get everything after the deleted elements and push it to the to this start elements array. So let I is now going to be equal to start index plus delete count. Cool? I is less than array dot length I plus plus. Sure. So we're gonna start I. So I is okay. So you have the start index, right? That's where you're starting in the array, and then you have the delete count, which is whatever comes after. So let's say it's like 2. So I plus the delete count will be like where the deleting stops. So if you start I there and then loop through the rest of the array, then you can get whatever it is you want to put on the back of the added element, or just minusing the deleted element. I feel like you don't need this step, but whatever. So now you say start elements dot push array at I. So now we should have the correct array. Start elements should have the correct array. Oh wait, yeah, you do need this. So, how do we actually alter the array? What is a way that we can alter and mutate the array that we're passing into this function? What are some array methods that mutate the original array? Yeah, but we're not targeting. we're doing my splice. So we can pop, right? We can literally just do a while loop, while array dot length, array dot pop. What is this line of code doing?
There's elements in that.
Exactly. While there's elements inside of this array, we're gonna pop off. We're gonna like get rid of the last element. So it's gonna go. So this statement's true. So it's gonna look at the last element. It's gonna mutate and pop it up. Now the array length is -1. So the while loop is gonna start over and pop out and pop out and pop out until there's nothing in the array. So then we break out of the while loop. And we mutated the actual array. But that's okay because we have what the result array should be, start elements. So then we should write another for loop. I is less than start elements dot length I plus plus. We loop through the start elements and we push in every single thing in start elements, and that is going to be how we mutate the original array. This block of code right here. First, we make the array that should be after you splice it out, and then you loop through that and first pop out everything, mutate it, and then push everything in, mutate it again. But now splice returns an array of the deleted elements, right? So that's why we stored this deleted elements thing right here. So at the end, you could just return deleted elements. So let's see if this works, right? So we'll say we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll say we'll start here, delete 1, and in this we're going to say and we'll set this equal to a variable. So now if we console.log results and we console.log array, let's see what happens. We get 3, and where 3 was, we get 1, 2, placeholder 4, 5. So this is actually the original array. I'm console logging array. I'm console logging array right here, okay? So the splice method works. Let's see what happens if we do 0, delete 3. Is that what's supposed to happen? Yes. So you start at 0, which was index 0 is 1, delete 3, 1, 2, 3. That's what's being returned. And now there's just one element, placeholder. And that's how splice works. And we just wrote that function.
Can you kind of like copy this variable to the Slack so we have
Yeah, I mean, I'll post the after the lecture. Is that cool? All right, cool. Does anyone want me to go over another one, or should we jump into the lecture? Did I hear a No, that's cool. You're not wasting anybody's time. It's all good.
I already didn't understand what's going on.
You understand what's going on in that question? In the last one?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't understand like the logic of this slice, why it is not going to the other any.
Wait. This question or a different question? This question?
No, not this question. The deeper topic.
Deeper copy? Well, I'll just do it. It's fine. Don't worry about it. So deeper copy is interesting because you remember that yesterday in the lecture I was talking about how if you dot slice off an array with an array in it, it's a shallow copy. It only copies the complex value inside of the array, which is an array. The reference is copied to the other end. So to do this, let's write a function deeper copy. And this is going to take in an array. So, first thing you want to do is you want to define copy. Because that's what we're going to be returning, right? We're going to be returning a copy. This copy will eventually equal this array. Well, not really, but yeah. So first thing we want to do is we want to loop through the array, right? Like simple. Bada bing, bada boom. Make this smaller. Okay. So for clarity, I'll pull out the element. So let current element, element equal to array at I. Right? So now we have to do our logic. We have to see if this is complex, if this is an array, or if it's not. So how do you check if this is an array or not? Hey, yeah. So we do like if array dot is array of current element. So you remember how this works. You take the global array constructor, and it has a method that says isArray. And then you just pass in anything, any element, and it tells you if it's an array or not. So, if it is an array, we want to do another thing. Let nested copy. We want to make a copy of this array.
Situation just for being an array.
Yeah.
Complex value. It's just for.
No, but yeah, I'm saying complex value, but this specific problem is designed just for arrays, not objects. If we wanted to check for objects too, this problem would get way too difficult.
But
Objects are also complex and also will give you a copy of the reference, but this is only for arrays.
Okay,
This problem.
I was at
I'm sorry?
It was the point that I.
Oh, that's the point? Yeah, so the problem is designed just for arrays, because if you also it's designed for one level. Like what if current element was an array and that array had other arrays in it? This could go on forever. So like we're keeping it simple, we're going like one level down, just a two-dimensional array, and we're only checking for arrays. Okay? So you have the nested copy, and then you have to do another for loop. Let j equal 0. J is less than current element dot length. J plus plus. Let me just point something out. So you guys realize how I'm using j here and not I. But in the other problem, I was using I all over the place. You have to change. You can't use I again because this for loop is inside of this for loop where I is defined. Okay? You can define another I outside of this for loop, but inside of this for loop, you can't use I again. So I have to change that to j. Okay? And then current element is that nested array. So we're going to be looping through that, and we're going to just say nested array dot push current. Oh, is it? That's my bad. Nested copy dot push of current element at j. Current element is the array we're looping through. J is the new index of this for loop, and we just push it into nested copy. So then we do copy dot push nested copy. because we just made a copy of that inner array and we're done, and the whole point is to push it into this copy. But that's only if this is an array. So, if it's not an array, copy.push current element. If it's not an array, you just push it in. Forget about it. That's it. Then, at the end, you just return copy. And that's it. It makes sense, right? You want to get into, if you find an array, you want to get into that, loop through that, then push it into another copy variable that you made, and then push that copy into the original copy. So now you're making a deeper copy, a one-level deeper copy. That's what this function's for. One level and only arrays. Cool? This isn't that bad, right? Yeah. I'll make it a little smaller. Is this better? Can you guys still see it if it's this size? Should I start the lecture? Okay. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about functions. We're going to be talking about functions for this lecture and the lecture that's going to start at 2. Functions are interesting. So you know how you can pass values into functions like strings and arrays and objects and do whatever with them, right? You can also pass functions into functions. So I'll show you an example. So let's say function calls other. Let's say you have a function that says calls other. And then down here, you have a function says hello. This function is only going to console.log hello world, right? This function will take a parameter, func, or a callback. And what this function will do is invoke that. So now, when you invoke calls other at the end, oh, did I do something wrong? Oh, I have to pass this in. That's my bad. So now you see that says hello is running. Functions can take anything in as parameters, any kind of data type, including functions. Okay? So calls other, since it's taking a function as a parameter, that's what we call higher order functions. That's what that is. A higher order function is a function that takes a function as a parameter. And you don't even have to do it like this, you know? Wait, yeah, well, whatever. You can define the function in here if you wanted to, you know? And a function that you pass into a higher order function, that function is called a callback. When you guys are actually developing, when you guys are actually going through full stack and then graduate full stack and then join the professional world, the word callback is going to get thrown around a lot. So just know that a callback is a function that you're passing into another function. This is the callback in this situation. You're passing it in here. And this is the higher order function, calls other. So with this, we will start the first lecture, okay? And I will stop at any point and code out examples if you guys need it, okay? Okay? Stuff's gonna get weird. So higher order functions. So in this lecture, in the first lecture of the day, we'll talk about why functions are special, passing functions into other functions, callbacks, and then I'm going to show you a method off an array, dot for each. So why are functions special? Functions are special because they aren't really. We think of functions as being different from other values in JS, but like strings, numbers, and arrays, we pass those into functions all the time, right? But functions are just like, they're not special. You can pass those into functions as well. It doesn't matter. It seems like they're in a different category, but in JS, functions are first-class objects, which is another way of saying that functions are like any other value in JavaScript, okay? You can do anything with them. So let's take an example.
Is that usage of the word objects different from regular objects that we're talking about? First class
Functions are technical. First-class objects? Well, I don't really know. But like, functions are technically objects. Yeah, just like arrays are technically. But like functions and arrays are completely different. So we know we can push strings or any value into arrays, right? So let's say you have let amazing array, happy string is just happy, amazing string dot push, happy string, happy string, happy string, console log amazing array. You get happy, 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 right? You guys are cool with that? So now here, functions aren't special, and we could pass them into an array too. So if you say a function is happy function, and it just console logs I am happy, and then here you just push happy function, happy function, happy function into amazing array, what we get is an array function, function, function. Okay? So you can push functions into arrays. Like I showed you with object methods, they can be values of keys. Functions are fine.
And then can you call them using the array index?
Yes. I think you guys did a problem in a workshop, call them all or whatever, where you loop through an array and call every function. It's the same thing. Sorry? I think like maybe like two classes ago. I can't remember. But like, yeah, if you wanted to do a for loop and there's an array with a bunch of functions, array at I at that point will be a function, and you can invoke it and call it with whatever you want. So it's the same thing. So how do we call? Oh yeah, this is an example right here. So function, happy function, console.log. So amazing array has three happy functions in it, right? So you set a for loop, let I equal to 0. I is less than amazing array.length, and then you're going to increment I by 1 every time. And then you set an element variable. You don't have to do that, but let's say you do. Set element variable equal to amazing array at I, right? But then you just invoke it. You call that function every time for everything in amazing array. And then you just get 3 I am happies in the console, because that's the only thing that function's doing. Any questions on how this is working?
Can you just walk through it?
Sure.
That's big.
So you're defining a function, happy function. That function console logs I am happy. So simple. That's just the most simple function you could ever write. Then you're defining amazing array. Amazing array is an array. And you could define arrays like this, pre-putting in values, right? And you're putting in happy function 3 times, so there's 3 spaces. So now, the length of amazing array is 3, and each value is a function. So, you guys are used to looping through arrays, right? So we loop through amazing array. Every element will be amazing array at I, right? So you just pull that out and set it equal to element. But every element in this case is a function. And how do you invoke functions? Like that. Element open paren, close paren. So as you're looping through the array, you're calling every function, and that's why you get I am happy 3 times.
So in the previous slide, the reason why we're using a function is because
Yeah, you're not invoking in the previous slide. In the previous slide, when we console log it, you saw an array. It was just like a weird function, right? That's how functions will be displayed in the terminal if you're trying to console log a function without calling it. It's just going to say function. Cool? Yeah.
is there a way to combine those last 2 lines into one without having to define an element?
Yeah, you just put these parentheses right here.
Just put them right there.
Amazing array and I invoke.
Okay, so you don't need to define elements.
No, you don't. It's just like sometimes it's clear if you do that. But in this case, this is very simple, so like, save some time, save a line. Put the, you know what I'm saying, but whatever. Cool on this, right? So let's talk about passing values into functions. We know we can pass strings or any value into a function, right? Console log, type of value, logs a type, happy string, it's just a string. And then you get string in the console, right? Type of value. So passing functions into functions. If functions are like any other value, we can pass functions into other functions too. And then functions that take a function or return a function are called higher order functions. We'll talk about returning functions in a second. So let's say you have function logs a type value, console.log type of value, right? Then we have function happy function. And then that's going to console.log I am happy. Logs a type happy function, and you get function. Cool? Happy function, you're defining as a function that just console logs I am happy. Simple function. You take happy function and you pass it into logs a type. Logs a type is being invoked with happy function right here. So this entire function is going through this thing, and it console logs type of that value, and that's why you get function. Cool? What's up?
So I understand this, but I feel like if I had to define it myself, I'm using the treatment by how valuable it is. Is there like a formula to know?
Oh yeah, so I remember somebody was always talking about how things are in order in this. Functions, when you define functions in this way, you could do that anywhere on the page. It's really weird. But like, usually the higher order function should be defined first, the thing that's going to be taken in functions. And then if you want to define other functions that would eventually be passed into this, I would define them after. But it honestly does not matter. I'll go over that at the end of this lecture. I'll explain why it doesn't matter. I'll show you. So if we want happy function to run, we have to call it. What does this do? Okay, so function calls a function, takes a parameter, another function, and it invokes that function. So this is what I showed you in the REPL. Function happy function is just that. So you say calls a function, you pass in happy function, and then you see in the console, I am happy. Right? This is what I showed you. Calls a function is being invoked with happy function. Happy function is console logs, I am happy. You take this whole thing, throw it in here, another function is being invoked. So this is being invoked, and it console logs, I am happy. Cool? So let's go over what's going on in this example. We have a function up here. It says hi. It takes in a name. It takes in a name parameter. It console logs hi and then name. So it's going to be whatever name you throw into it. Then we have another function. It says bye. And it's exactly the same as says hi, except you're saying bye to the name that's being passed in. Does everyone understand these two functions? These are simple, right? So now we have this other function, calls with name, which takes in a name and a callback. This is just the parameter name, but you remember that a function being thrown into another one is a callback, right? This is the higher order function, and the function that's being thrown in here is the callback. So then, the callback is just going to be invoked with whatever you're throwing into here. So, calls with name, Sadie says hi. You're calling calls with name with the string Sadie and says hi. So says hi is this callback now, and Sadie is being passed into says hi. So it's going to say hi Sadie, right? And the same thing with bye Sadie. Yeah, maybe look at the yeah. Sorry. Do you guys get this? Why? With the last slide? This one? Another function is just the parameter. That's just.
No, I mean like I guess I don't quite understand. I understand being called that function. I don't see how creating another function is that just a descriptor too, an example.
Another function is just the name that this example chose to give its parameter. That could be called back as well. It doesn't matter. Like the like calls a function is going to take a parameter, right? It's going to take. Well, I mean, you're going to define parameter because it's going to be called with something. In this case, it's always going to be called with a function. So you could just say another function, and then it's going to reference that as another function.
I guess is that another function defined somewhere? Like the name of it defined somewhere?
No, it's defined when you, as the parameter. When you write, when you're defining a function, and then you put some word in here as a parameter, that's defined. So anything that's being passed into this function will be this here, so that you can access it inside of the function when you're making it like that. You get that? Okay. What's up?
Callback is the keyword you are using for identify that you will use a function.
Callback is the word for a function that is being thrown into another function. That is what a callback
So we have to use this word.
is. You don't have to.
It's not a reserved.
It's not a
Just
reserved
using
word. You don't have to use callback. But if I'm looking at your code, and then you say, and you define that as callback, make that parameter callback. You can make that another function like before if you wanted to. But if you make that callback, I'll know that wherever
It's just like
I'll
using I for
yeah,
iteration.
I is index. You know, like it's just like logical. If you wanted to do that, you don't have to do that. Some people like to write func, F-U-N-C. You can do whatever you want, but like callback, that word is a function being thrown to another. So you don't have to write callback, but it does make it more clear for other programmers who are reading your code. Okay. Okay. So in this example, we have function add world, right? And it's going to take a string. We're going to return string plus world, okay? So if the string is to equal hello, it's going to return hello world. Everyone understand this function right here? Everyone gets this function. It's taking a string and it's just going to return that string plus world. So now we make a function called calls with hello, func, and it's going to return the func. Like I just said before, this could be a parameter, this could be callback, this could be another function, whatever. Now it's func. And you're going to return func hello. So before we were just invoking things. But now we're going to return an invoked function. So when you pass add world into calls with hello, it's going to return add world. So, what do you think results will be? Let results equal calls with hello invoked with add world. What do you think results will be? It's going to be hello world. Let me explain to you what's going on. Calls with hello takes a function. The function you're passing it is this one. It sees this return keyword. So the return value of this, when it's being invoked, it looks and sees what's to the right of it, and it sees a function that's being invoked. So this function is being invoked, returns string plus world. So func hello will be this. So it returns this, and then that's what you get down here. I'll do it again slowly. I got you. So calls with hello is a function that takes a function, right? Calls with hello is a higher order function. Cool? In that function now, instead of just invoking something, we're returning this. So every time you invoke calls with hello, we expect a value to come in. We expect something to come back. So you can set that to a variable, right? You guys have done this before with other functions. So, in this case, the return value will be a function that's being invoked. So you can't, if there was no invocation here, you would just return, like in the console before, how there was like the array with function in it. That's what would be the return value, the literal function. But since you're invoking it and passing hello into it, it has to run this function, right? It has to run add world. And when add world runs with hello here, you get a string hello world. So that is the result of func running with hello. So that's what will be returned in this function. Let that sink in for a bit.
Are the backslashes used to change the color? Because those are kind of tricky.
Those are commas.
Okay, so that it's supposed to not.
If you do backslash and write whatever on the same line, but comments and
No, that's what I thought, but then I was okay. So those are not being read by.
No. This is just an example of what will happen in this function. If you pass in hello, it will return hello world. If you pass in add world, it will return. Func will be add world and will be console logged with hello. Okay. Well, here, I'll just. This is easier for me to show you in live. And this is a good question, and this is what I wanted to get into at some point. So let's say you have says hello. Okay, so this is going to return the callback, right? Says hello, and this is going to be. We'll do it the same way. Like this is just going to take. Actually, this one will take two things. This one will take string. This one will take string, call it with the string, and this is going to take a string, and it's just going to return hello plus string. You guys get this? You guys get what's going on? I'm making calls other, take in a string and a callback. And it's just going to return the invocation of that callback with the string. So, when I set results equal to calls other, invoked with Marco and says hello, this value results will be equal to whatever this function returns. Calls other is returning a function invoked. So if you pass, and then it's calls other takes in a string, and that string is Marco. So calls back, this callback here is being passed Marco. And that callback is says hello. So says hello takes the string Marco and it returns hello string. So callback invoked will be hello Marco, and that returns to this invocation, and that will be hello Marco, and then you console log result. Let's say you return calls other just returns the function. See why that's happening? You're not invoking that function anymore. You're not invoking callback anymore. You're just returning the function. Not the invocation of it, just the function. So, says hello is never running. When you're running a function, you do the double parentheses, and that invokes it, and then that says hello will run, right? But in this case, we're not doing that anymore. We're just returning callback, and then that's why result is function says hello. So, back to that question from before, let's say this didn't return hello string. Let's say this console.logged hello string. Console.logging something is not returning something, right? So what happens when you don't return something from a function? What's returned? Huh? Undefined. So, oh, I'm not passing this. That's my bad. So, results is undefined. But this function is still running. It's just not returning anything. You don't get a value after this is run, right? You don't get it. Nothing's being returned from this value. It's just constant, just putting in the console hello. But since nothing is being returned from this function, undefined is implicitly returned. So, this is undefined. When you invoke this function, what you get back is undefined. So if you return the returned value of this undefined, here, results is being set to undefined. Does that answer your question?
That might be the reverse. So I meant to say, I misspoke, but
Oh.
I meant the higher order functions never returns it.
Oh, like this? This is the same thing, except since there's no console anymore, it's not being console logged in the terminal, right? So like nothing's in this terminal. It's still running. You're invoking it with the string. This function still runs, and it gets the return value, right? It gets it. So this is equal to hello Marco. But calls other isn't returning anything. So if you set results equal to that being invoked, you get undefined. Because this is not returning anything, so undefined is implicitly returned. Yeah.
Could you number the different blocks of code for us so that we can see like which is happening first or which is
Sure. So it goes, so the program is running. These things are defined as functions. These are just definitions. Nothing's happening when it goes through line by line. Nothing happens here. Then you hit line 96. You're defining a variable results, and you set it equal to calls other, right? But it's not just a function. It's being invoked. So, right away, to get what this value is, it has to run calls other. So this is step one. Calls other runs. Well, I'll return this so it's not undefined anymore. Calls other is now running, right?
Wait, so you're calling the top one number 1, but you said that doesn't really get queued until this line 97 here?
Yeah. Because these are just definitions.
It's not running until you call it.
It's not running until you're calling it here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like in my mind, I'm including 97 as like the first thing.
Yes.
Okay, so step one, function called, right? So this is step two now, and calls other is running. Everyone agree? So now that calls other is running, it looks, so Marco and says hello, a function that was defined here, is being passed into here. So string is equal to Marco, and callback is equal to says hello. So now we're on step three. Step three is going to be calling the callback, or says hello. Understand? So step two, it's going to call this function, and step three, you're going to call callback because you're returning it. The return value is going to be an invocation. It's going to be a function being invoked. I mean, this would run even if you weren't returning it. You're still going to run it if you're invoking it. So you return call callback. Now the program looks for what callback is and then runs it with string. Callback, it says hello. So we go down here, and this is step 4. Run says hello. It runs says hello with the string that was originally passed into calls other, which is Marco. So string is equal to Marco here, and then step 5 will be returning the value. So the value is being returned. So now we go back up here, and here we have step 6. We are returning hello Marco. Because this, after it's done running, is returning that, right? So now this equals this. This equals this. So now we come back here to step 7 and calls other is now equal to hello Marco. And then you console log the result. Yeah, this appears nonlinear, like the steps going up and down, but it is. The program knows at this point, like these two, like when I said before, like how you said this doesn't make any sense, this is step 1 in my head. Well, no, actually, never mind. This is step one, technically, I guess. But like when the program's running, it sees these keywords function here and here, right? And that just means that you're defining a function. Nothing's happening with the function. You're just putting it in there. You're just putting it in the program, defining what it does. It's going to be called later. So it's running line by line, right? Then you hit 107 and it runs. So then all that logic is done right there when you hit 107. Then you hit 111 and then you console log. Yeah, I'll select this entire file. Don't worry. Is everyone cool on this? Hopefully a little bit. So we did this. So let's look at what this is doing. Let's look at this example. So we have function say to all. You're defining this, right? And this function say to all is going to take names, a parameter, and it's going to take say with name func. So just by judging, not even looking at anything else, names is plural, so this is probably an array, right? This is not one value. This is going to be something that contains multiple values. So this is probably an array. This has the word func in it, so this is probably a function. So say to all is probably a higher order function, right? So you look and see what say to all is doing. It's a for loop that's looping through the length of names, so it is an array. And at every point in names, you're going to call say with name func whatever's being passed into this with that current element, names at I. That's what this function is doing. It's just looping through an array and calling them it's looping through an array, and at every iteration, at every time, you're going to call this function with the element at that index, at that array, in that point of time. So then we define an array like group, Jane, Jill, Pip, Mike, right? Just an array with 4 values in it. Then we define another function, say hello with name. This function looks like it's taking one element, name, and it looks like it's just going to console log hello, name, exclamation point. So down here, when we run say to all, we're going to be passing in this array group, and we're going to be passing in this function. Says hello with name. So when we're invoking this, say to all, it's going to look at names, it's going to loop through, so now we're on let I is 0, index 0 is Jane, and we're going to call say hello with name with Jane. So it should console log hello Jane, exclamation point. Then, when the loop is iterated, we're on Jill, and it's going to do the same thing. It's going to call say with name func, which is say hello with name, because that's what we're passing in over here. And it's going to say hello Jill, exclamation point. And it's going to go so on, and that's what you get in the terminal. So like this is pretty standard stuff that you guys have been doing, right? You're writing a function that takes an array. Inside that function, you're looping through it and doing something with that, right? Just in this case, you're calling the second parameter is a function, so you're just going to call that every time with the different element in the array every time. So that's why you get all those constants. Okay? What? Oh yeah, so this is what I was talking to before. So this is the exact same thing as the previous slide, but there's a subtle difference, besides the saying Bob. You're defining, this is the same function as before, loops through an array and calls a function with each different element in the array. But this time we're not defining the console logging by name, exclamation point. We're not defining that anywhere in the code. But we're defining it while we're passing it in. You can do this. You're going to call say to all group, which is this. And then the second parameter should be a function, right? Because that's what we're doing over here. But you didn't write a function anywhere, so you can just write it in here. Function takes name, console.log by name, and it gives you the same result. It's the same thing. Usually, you would want to do something like this if your function is a one-liner, does one very specific thing, and you never have to worry about it. So you don't have to waste your time creating more, taking up more space and defining a function outside of it. So if this was like a one-line thing like this, you could just do it in here. Also, you could do it in there if it's a one-liner and you're just never going to use it anywhere else. So you don't have to define a variable and set it to a function or something. You could just pass it in an anonymous function like that. Because here, we're not even giving this function a name. Say to all, this function doesn't have a name. It's anonymous. Because it's being taken as a parameter. Okay? You could do this if you want. You don't have to do that. It's purely preference. If this psychs you out, just define it. Like, it doesn't matter. It's fine. Okay? Okay. I think this might be the last example. So, let's talk about this example. Let's talk about what's going on. Right away, I see three function keywords, right? So let's look at the first one. First one is called plus. Takes in num1, takes in num2, returns num1 plus num2. It's adding two numbers together. Function minus, doing the same thing except subtracting, right? This is simple stuff. Now we have a function calc. Calc is going to take in num1. It's going to take operation func, so this is probably a function, and it's going to take a second number. And it's going to return operation func, whatever that function being passed into this is, and it's going to invoke that with num1 and num2. So, if we're going to console log calc invoking with 10, plus, and 20, we should see 30. Right? I'll walk you through. Calc invoked, num1 is now equal to 10, operation func is now equal to plus, num2 is now equal to 20. So this function is returning operation func, num1, num2. It's returning plus 10, 20. Plus num1, num2, return num1 plus num2, plus return 10 plus 20. You're returning 30, so that is what this is. So you're returning 30 from this value. Same thing, so you got the 30. Same thing with minus. You're calling calc with 50, minus, and 10. Calc returns minus with 50 and 10. Operation func is minus, num1 is 50, and num2 is 10, because that's what you're calling it with. So, minus just returns num1 minus num2. Num1 is 50, and num2 is 10. So returns 40, 50 minus 10 is 40. So this is now equal to 40. So it returns 40, and that's why you see the console log. No. that would be undefined. If you don't return num1 plus num2 in either plus or minus, the return value of that will be undefined, because if you don't return anything from a function, it implicitly returns undefined. So the return value of operation func here is undefined. So if you console log this, it will be undefined.
Okay, so basically like
If you want that function to have a return value, yeah.
yeah. But if you have an embedded function,
A what?
the callback function is always
Yeah, if you're ever like setting something equal to a function being invoked, that function should always be returned. Because then otherwise it's just going to be undefined. Cool? Yeah.
Can you clarify what you got lost on the second, I don't know how to explain operation func? How is that matching up to function plus function minus?
So this right here is a definition, right? You're defining calc right here. This is you writing this function calc. When you're saying calc, it's going to take three parameters. It's going to take num1, first number. It's going to take operation func, some type of function. And it's going to take num2, a second number. So three things. So then you return this function, whatever it is, invoked with whatever these two numbers are. So down here, when you call calc, you're passing in plus. You're passing in minus.
So it's kind of like, so function will be treated the same way as you treat the number.
Yes.
Yeah, you would just kind of call that function.
Exactly. In this case, in this case, plus and minus are callbacks. And calc is the higher order function.
And then how do you know, what, you're using operation func to get that same function, how would you know how would you think to return operation func?
What do you mean? How would you
Should you always be returning, or is it return operation func? That's what the system is.
How would you know to do that?
Yeah.
Well, if you're writing the higher order function, you should know, let's say you're writing that first. You're writing calc. It's going to take a function. It's going to take two numbers. Well, you don't know what the function is, so you're going to return whatever that function is. And then you have to write the other two functions, and you have to make sure those are returning something, or else it's going to be undefined. You got it? So now I'm going to show you guys an array method, .forEach, which is kind of doing this. A function passed into another function is often called a callback. Cool. You guys know that. Some built-in JavaScript features use callbacks. .forEach is an array method, and it accepts a callback as its only argument. ForEach calls the callback for every element in that array. When .forEach calls the callback, it passes the current element as the first argument of the callback. So, whoops. So, here's an example right here. So, you're defining, hold on. The callback passed into ForEach also takes an optional second argument. For each passes the current index of the element as the second argument. So, let me walk you through this example, nice and slow, okay? You define bridges, right? Bridges is an array of three things, all strings, Brooklyn, Golden Gate, London, okay? Then you're going to define a function, log with index. This function takes in a string and takes in an index. So, an index is probably a number, right? So it takes a string and a number, and it console logs whatever that string is at index, whatever that number is. This is a simple function, right? Takes in a string and a number and console logs a sentence, basically, with them together. So now you have bridges, and you just do dot for each and invoke it. But the thing you pass in there is log with index. So you get Brooklyn is at index 0, Golden Gate is at index 1, London is at index 2. You don't need to invoke this function. You don't need to pass it any parameters. Because you know that this function, string and index, you know that for each takes a callback as its parameter, right? It takes another function as its parameter, as its only parameter. And what for each is doing for you, it's looping through the entire array, calling this function with the current element and an optional index, which is defined here. So the current element will be the string, and the current index will be that index.
I guess there's two things. One, I'm a little confused by using this dot notation with bridges dot for each.
So you know, bridges is an array.
Bridges is the array and for each is the function. That's
So can you write bridges not push? Can you?
Yeah.
This is the same thing.
So
For each is another array method that you can do on any array.
okay, that's an array method.
That is an array method. No, we did not write for each. For each is built into JavaScript. If
Okay,
you have
cool.
an array,
That's
you can
what
dot
was
off it.
screwing me up because I thought we like had
No,
defined
no, no.
for each on the previous slide.
No. For each is built in for you,
Okay.
and you pass it a function. And what for each is doing, without you writing a for loop, taking out the current element, calling a function on it, it loops through the array, and the function you pass into it, it calls that function with the current element every time. And if you wanted to, for each also gives you the index at that current element.
So is IDX a word for index?
No, that's just a parameter. See, so bear with me. So for each takes a callback, right? It takes a function, right? And it's going to call that function for every index in the array, right? It's going to loop through the array, and it's going to call that function for everything. For each is giving that function. That function logs with index. For each, the method, is throwing that function, the element, and its index. For each is pulling those things from the array. It's pulling out Brooklyn, it's pulling this out, and 0. And
no
it's
matter what that's called.
whatever
what
this
that-
is, whatever this function is doing, if you dot for each off bridges, first it's going to throw Brooklyn and 0 at you. Then it's going to throw Golden Gate and 1. Then it's going to throw London and 2. So this function you're writing here, if you didn't put index here, and it's just, and you just want to console log the string, you could do that.
So IDX is a.
IDX is a parameter in this function that you define. So IDX for each is going to throw you Brooklyn and 0, right? It's going to throw this function Brooklyn and 0. Brooklyn and 0.
So IDX is a main index. As long as that something's there, it's asking it to call the
Exactly. As long as you're defining a function with 2 things, and you're going to throw that into for each, then for each, the string is always going to be the first argument. The element will always be the first argument, and the second parameter is always going to be the index.
So you could call that value 1, value 2, and it would still throw it.
For sure, yeah.
Okay. So order is important.
Yes. So, like, if you were thinking, let's say you changed index to string and string to index, right? You said index string, and then you're saying string is at index. That makes sense from a human perspective, right? But for each, the first element is always the first parameter is always the element, and the second parameter is always the index. So, index would now be the bridge, and string would now be the index. So it'd be like 0 is at Brooklyn. You know? So name your know what the order is for. This is case specific for each. Okay. Know what the parameters are going to be and name them accordingly. Okay. Do you want me to go over what's going on again? Because I think there's another example on the next page. We could do a different example. We'll do a different example. Oh no, there's no example. I'll do this one again. You have bridges, which is an array. So bridges, you could do .push, .pop, .map, .concat, and .for each. This is a built-in JavaScript method for arrays specifically. For each takes one argument, and that argument is a function, a callback. So for each then says it's going to call this function on every element, right? But really what it's doing is just calling log with index for everything that's in the array, right? And logs with index is automatically going to be passed with the current element at that time and its index. Automatically. So when you define the function that you're going to pass into a for each, you have to be prepared for that. It has to take 2 parameters. Well, I mean, it doesn't really have to. I mean, if you wanted to just not use anything in this and just no parameters here and just console log hi, I will run 3 times. It's going to call the function regardless, and it's going to throw parameters. But like, if you don't use the parameters in the function, then the function still runs, but like, you just won't have access to the elements. I don't know why you would do that. Then you wouldn't use for each.
In this block, we're not using the optional second argument feature for each, right? Because
We are.
but we're writing that into the function block with index.
Yeah.
But the for each piece is below that, and there's only one argument for each. Or
You don't, okay, don't get confused. For each takes one argument. And that is a function. And what for each is doing, it's calling a function and giving it 2 parameters. Current element of
can you say again?
I'll show.
What it's
I'll code this part
doing
out for
is
you.
Accepting one argument and calling.
And I think it'll be easier if I. And I think it'll be easier if I do this. So let's say I have an array. You guys can see this, right? Let's say I have an array. Well, I'll do the same thing, bridges. Whatever. I'll do golden, gate, GW, Brooklyn, and then I'll do, what's another bridge? Cool. Manhattan. Cool. So I have this array, right? So I think the thing that was confusing you on that slide is that we were defining the function first. Usually, like in my experience, when I'm using for each, I'm not passing a defined function. I'm defining the function inside it, which you can do. So, bridges.forEach, right? Oh, god damn it. Bridges.forEach, right? Right? Everyone agrees that you have an array. For each is an array method, so you do dot for each, right? Everyone's still following. And remember what I said, that for each takes a function. You could define that function outside if you want to. You could also write it in here. And this might be a little easier to understand, because this is going to take a current element, and this is going to take an index. And it's always, current element is always going to be the first thing, and index is always going to be the second thing. for each is giving this function these things. So then here, you could just do console.log. I could do, what is it, current element is at index. And then you get the same thing. So I think this is actually easier for you guys. Do you think this is easier for you guys to understand how for each is working? Do you guys think so? If you're defining the function inside of it? You say array dot for each, right? And a for each takes a function. It takes a callback. For each is a higher order function type. It is an array method, but it's a higher order function. So what you're passing it, I'm just going to define it in there. Any function that you pass here is going to take a current element, and it is going to take an index because you're using for each. If you're using for each, the function that's being passed to it has to take a current element, and it has to take an index. That's just what's going on. Well, I mean, it doesn't have to. Like, you can just give this nothing, and you could just say, but now that's undefined, right? Because current element and index isn't defined in this function. But you could just console log hello, and it'll run 3 times. It's still calling it on everything. But if your function isn't going to use the elements, then like, what's the point of using for each, am I right? So it's just like the function you call is just like any other function. You have to define it. The function you have to define its 2 parameters so that inside of that function block, you can use it. And then that's what you get. Who has questions? What's up? I can come over and help you debug your code after, if that's cool. So if there's no more questions, you guys could take like 5 minutes, and then I'll open up the workshop, and then you guys can dive into this. And we'll talk more about functions at like 2 o'clock. So you guys work on the workshop until like 1. Take a break for lunch, and then we'll start up again at 2. But I'll still be here to help you guys with break. Okay? Cool? You guys alright? So take 5.